trials. Wait, fine, are you ready? You ready? Not yet? We have the macro clinical trials from Beverly Hills. We have the site director. We have the physician PI. And, you know, you're so prepared, Daniel, and you got a great name. You're going to lead this one, more or less. So why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll get into what you guys do.
All right, so just by show of hands, everyone here who's out there, you know, handing over cards and everything, how many of you guys are site owners? Just curious to know. Site owners? Show of hands. How many of you guys are PIs or investigators? And how many of you guys work or operate in management or leadership of the site? Just by show of hands. Okay, cool. So Macro Trials is located in Beverly Hills. My name's Daniel. I'm the director of site operations, and you know, really, in terms of talking about vision and what we set out to do, I'll hand it over to Dr. Cabin. But essentially, in a nutshell, what we set out to do is change the narrative for what a site management organization can potentially be. So why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
I'm John Cabin. I'm a physician, and I actually I don't have a tremendous amount of background in research, and I came upon this because the group of doctors I work with were trying to start our own site to just do research in the fields we're involved in. So that's ENT, plastic surgery, dermatology. And what we quickly realized was that there were a whole network of doctors in our area that were prestigious, had been involved in research or wanted to be involved in research, but did not have the infrastructure within which to do it. And obviously the SMO world existed, but the SMO world was not set up to actually go into their practices and to help them do this work where they're comfortable working with their busy schedules. And so we saw an opportunity to build an organization that does really high level infrastructure, quality research support, almost as an institution for physicians that otherwise don't want the administrative, bureaucratic, regulatory headache of doing the research itself. And it dovetails a little bit with what Dr. Azam was saying about doctors sort of dropping out of research or not wanting to do it. And I think a lot of that comes down to a mismanagement of what these doctors are actually doing day to day, and having the right people in place to do the work that the doctor should not be focused on. Every doctor is trained that comes out of medical school is capable of doing research. It's just a matter of having the support network around them to do that. So what we're doing is we're partnering with doctors in our area who want to be involved in research. We're matching them with trials, and we're helping them do these trials out of their own spaces or out of our own clinical space.
Yeah, so I think, and then my background, just so everyone knows, I started my career in clinical research being a study coordinator in a large, prestigious academic medical center. And one of my biggest frustrations was, why does the research staff get in trouble for trying to follow protocol? And you know, the physicians will kind of get away with bending the rules so far that you would think this would break the ethics of the research. And so then I kind of progressed in my career trying to figure out how to be aggressive and fight the good fight in terms of quality for the clinical trial. Came to realize that maybe the academic medical center is not the most fertile grounds for a clinical trial, for industry-sponsored clinical research. Perhaps because...
No kidding.
Yeah. Perhaps because the people who are managing clinical research staff they themselves don't have clinical research expertise. They're administrative directors, administrative managers, clinical managers. So that's kind of how I fell into macro, and how I found Dr. Cabin was because, you know, I was like, this kind of has to stop at some point. Where do we set out to focus only on clinical trials as, you know, what we set out to do versus we're up here to promote Dr. So-and-so's research portfolio specifically. So that kind of leads us into the conversation of clinical research staff recruitment and talent development, and most importantly, retention in an industry that has such high turnover rates, where if you get your study coordinator to the 2-year mark, it's almost unheard of nowadays.
2-year mark for the coordinator?
Yeah.
Huh?
Or even the CR.
Monica's more than that.
Yeah.
Yes, but 2 years is that the average?
Well, from what I've seen.
Wow, okay. And then PI is even less from what we've done. So what do you think is the reason? Because when PIs go to academia, they stay longer. Like why? I mean, I think because they have to, but how can we benefit from that?
Well, you said it. They have to. A physician that's ascending the ranks of faculty at an academic medical center is to a certain extent obligated for a certain percent of their FTE to research activity. So by inception, you are throwing study coordinators in an academic medical center to doctors who may not even want to be doing this, but they want the faculty prestige. So that system is a little broken there. But speaking about CRC talent recruitment and management, talent development, things of that
It's
nature.
so hard to find a coordinator.
Well, it's even harder to understand what you should be looking for. So I was talking to somebody back here, Hassania, about CRC, what makes a good CRC, or what are the foundations for good CRC talent? Is it because they have such a good grip on GCP? Is it because they have a good grip on protocol? Is it because they're good at organizing? Are they good at, what is it? You can train anybody on a protocol, or how to be a coordinator, or how to assess for adverse events, and what is within the scope of a CRC versus at what point do you engage the PI. What you can't necessarily train somebody is on how to be empathetic. How do you have a conversation? How do you feel the uncomfortable nature of challenging a physician and act anyway? Because at the end, you're there to support that physician's research endeavors, and they may directly or indirectly not realize this, but...
Give an example of like when it gets tough for a coordinator to have this conversation with a PI.
Sure, so maybe you have a PI who's got a busy clinical practice, and the research patient is not going to reimburse him at the same rate as a cash paying patient. So now the PI may be putting a lot of preference and priority over their cash paying patients and scheduling, but the research patient is in a clinical trial with a schedule, with a window of when they need to be seen, and if they're out of that window, they're now in protocol deviation. So that coordinator may or may not want to push back on that PI and say, I understand that that cash paying patient is important to you, but you agreed to do this trial, and this is your obligation, and I'm here to support that, because it may not mean anything right now, but when the monitor comes in 2-3 months, you have pages of protocol deviations that you're then looking at me like this is somehow my fault.
Yeah.
So how do you develop those soft skills in a CRC? And then it also translates to turnover rate, because if the CRC doesn't feel supported in their role, they're saying, well, the PI is always against me, or my manager doesn't understand what I do, they're going to leave. And then you're stuck having to recruit another CRC, train them, and you're back to square one, because you're not changing the culture
Which is
of
almost
your site.
impossible in Southern California to get an experienced coordinator that wants to work with a new site. Usually they go on to CRA, and usually what we've done is we had to groom from potential, right? And then train them on how to be coordinators. So that's like the only options you have, and not a lot of sites have time to do that.
Right.
They have a study, or they may have, in a time like we're in now, they may have like 4 new studies starting, and they don't have a coordinator, or their one coordinator has like 8 studies.
Exactly.
So this is important. Now, what can people do who haven't broken into the industry yet? What can they take from this?
Be aggressive. Be aggressive and realize that there are people out there who are looking for the skills that you have to offer that have absolutely nothing on the surface to do with clinical trials, but maybe you worked in marketing, or maybe you worked in, retail is a big one. It's an interview question that I do when I'm looking for study coordinators, is talk to me about, client relationships, or talk to me about customer service. And you get 1 or 2 responses. One is, well, we don't work in retail. Okay, I put those candidates over here. And then, customer service is everything, because you're developing a relationship not just with the patient, but with the clinician, with the nursing staff. Everyone needs to come together to put together what is the product, and that is the patient moving through the clinical trial. That tells me in a nutshell that this person has immense potential, and I can train them on everything else. I can't train somebody per se on the value of human relationships. So for people looking to break into the industry, focus on your strengths rather than trying to wing it, of like, oh yeah, I know clinical trials, and if you have no experience, somebody who's interviewing is going to see immediately past that. Your inexperience is going to be very loud immediately. So don't do that. Focus instead on the strengths and the value that you have to offer, because 9 times out of 10, it's easy to train a study coordinator in the protocol and what to do. It's not easy to train somebody on how to be a human being and to work with doctors and patients.
And learn new skills, learn SEO. Chris, we got that email today from one of our students. She's getting offered a contract position, commission only, to recruit physicians.
Yeah.
And they're going to pay her like 14%.
Yeah.
That's like sub-I money. And she's
Better than
brand new.
sub-I money.
Better than sub-I money. So, you know, that one was interesting to me. I don't know about 14%.
Yeah, I'm not
that's a
sure I
lot.
believe in it, but okay.
We'll see what happens. So how do you guys recruit physicians at Macro?
So one of the most important things, and it kind of connects with what Daniel was saying, is that I think the area within this world that's ripe for disruption is creating an environment of transparency, a culture of transparency and communication. And so our number one concern when we go out and we reach out to a PI or a PI reaches out to us is this someone that we want to work with? Is this someone that we can communicate with? I think a lot of the high cost, both emotional, financial, the heavy lifting that's done in the research world is because there's so little communication between the different players in the study. I mean, as a doctor, I know that I rely on Daniel for a lot of stuff that I can't do. I'm not trained to do. I don't know how to do it. And he relies on me on stuff. And I think a lot of times what, again, Dr. Azam was saying is that, the doctor gets caught up in all of this administrative, bureaucratic stuff or thinks they should be, and they get involved in a job they shouldn't do. And so you want to meet a PI who knows their role, knows that they're valued as a clinician, that wants to do really good research on a clinical level and can rely on and trust the team around them, which is us, to support them in that role. And if we meet a PI that has, that starts talking about how they know how to do everything and they've done a ton of research and, they don't need a lot of help, or just the vibe isn't there that they're going to be easy to work with, next.
So when it comes to research naive physician, because one of the things I've noticed, not just from my own sites, but from people I talk to, your first PI, especially when you're both kind of new, like if the PI is research naive and if you have a startup, they're most likely going to leave at some point, right? And then it gets a little better if the site has the experience, but then the PI doesn't. And then it gets very good when they both have the experience. So a lot of the sites here, they're established, but they're always on the offense, or at least they should be. We are too. We're recruiting physicians all the time because we need more, right? We want to do more studies. We want to build our site network. But we always get, like, how do we keep these physicians? Sometimes it doesn't really matter what you tell them. They already have in their mind what they think research is. And then when they join you, they realize, hey, this is not what I thought it was going to be. It's more work than I thought. And the money's not as great because, and this is another thing, they always leave at the worst time. Like when the PI leaves in this situation, the next one that comes in loves research because they get paid almost from day one. Because all the doctor who left, like all their money goes to the new person. So how do you get over that? Because we know it's a problem, but how do you get that to the PI?
I think it really, again, comes down to transparency and honesty. You need to understand the incentive of a PI. And I believe that everyone has different incentives in life. Some people are incentivized more by money, some are incentivized more by prestige, some are incentivized by building their career. And if you can understand the incentives of that PI, then you can communicate with them regularly about how we're meeting those goals of theirs, instead of just putting it on autopilot. So for example, we have a PI who is really just in it because they want extra cash flow to build their practice. That's fine with me, as long as you're motivated by that. And so we're very specific with them about what the financial goals are, what the incentives are, how we build our contract to incentivize them to make more money by doing the things we want them to do. And instead of doing a cookie cutter approach where you're just treating everyone the same, you have to really understand what, and I think this is true for any organization, whether it's the people that work with us in Macro or whether it's people we reach out to as PIs, you want to understand what motivates this person, what's their incentive, and then you want to work on that line and keep dialing that in to keep people engaged. Otherwise, you become another bureaucratic, administrative hospital or academic center where you're just treating everyone the same and people revolve out the door.
Chris, what do you think about all of this?
Oh, we have a few questions, so.
Oh, we have questions? Oh, this is good. We're giving out books. I forgot.
I can use the second one.
Okay.
So if somebody's motivation is money, that's an obvious one. You give them money. You track money and there it is. But you hit on one that I find a few times with working with physicians, which is the prestige and the power and sometimes being tyrants. How do you feed that one? You'll delete that, right?
No,
Oh, me?
we'll run an ad with Anthony, or Andrew, sorry. Facebook ad.
I think there's a difference between wanting to have prestige and being a tyrant.
Okay.
And I think being a tyrant, whether you're a doctor or any position in the world, it means you're insecure about something. And those are people I don't want to work with, right? But if you're someone that just wants prestige, and a lot of times it's either, there may be an indirect financial incentive, right? I want to be known as a researcher so I get more patients that think I'm prestigious and make more money. Or they just like the idea of rising in the ranks at academia. They're looking for a position at a university and it looks good for them to have research on their CV. And again, that's an easy one, because then you're just saying, okay, let's find some studies, or we have the study that, is within your subspecialty of, retinal diseases or whatever, and it's a biologic, and, and let's try to get you as a PI in the study, and then suddenly, and again, it's never one or the other, it's a mixture of both. But I think that, again, it's understanding what that is and tailoring your conversations to that. Yeah, question over there.
I just wanted to know, aside from cash flow or research academics being able to list it on your CV, are there other incentives or motives that you've seen physicians have for PI work?
Yeah, a big one is networking. A current PI we're working with, he's building his practice in LA, and he's just looking for more referrals. And so one of the things he asked me when we signed him up is, can you connect me with other doctors you work with, or that doctors that have done other studies, so I can just meet with them and talk to them about what I do. And so I connect him with a neurologist, I connect him with an endocrinologist, and suddenly he sees value in just being part of our team. And that's, again, goes to the idea of transparency and mutual respect, of just creating an environment where it's not just about, PI 1, 2, and 3. It's about, again, how you would treat anyone that you want, how you would want to be treated with people you work with.
I'd also like to add, another thing is, maybe you have an investigator that is very research oriented in the creative space of the science behind a drug or the development, or they're really excited about it, but they're tied up in their academic institution affiliation. And the only way they can do that trial is within the infrastructure of that academic affiliation. And whether the manager of that department doesn't want to allocate another staff, or they're having a hard time recruiting a CRC, or they don't want to go to their local IRB, whatever the issue is, maybe that investigator just doesn't want to do this trial there. Their incentive to bring it to us is the bureaucracy is probably low to none. We defer to central IRB as much as we possibly can. I see you looking at me from work. Because it's so easy to work with, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. Why should we have a local IRB for something that we like to offer? And for that particular investigator, working with us is like a kid running wild in a candy store, because they have the best of both worlds. They have the infrastructure and the quality of a large academic institution with somebody centrally managing the CRC, and the CRCs are damn good, but they also don't have to get tied up in the bureaucracy of what that means in doing the trial.
Any more questions? So I see, like Dr. Hayes and similar, if you build a platform, first of all, what's Macro's objective? Like, what are you guys trying to do?
That's a great question.
And give us some background on your company. Either one.
Take that one.
So I'll tell you guys sort of a story about how this came to be. So myself and 2 other doctors, we wanted to create a company, basically a site, where we brought in trials that were within our subspecialties. So dermatology, plastic surgery, aesthetic medicine. I'm with a plastic surgeon and a dermatologist, and I'm a plastic surgeon myself. And in the process of putting this together, a colleague of ours who's an ophthalmologist just texted me and said, hey, and he's a big researcher that moved from chairman of a university into private practice, and he said, I have this study, a drug that I helped develop, and I want to do it out of my practice. Do you know any CRCs or anyone that can help me? And a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, we have an infrastructure, why can't we just put it into his office, which is what we ended up doing. And, seeing the opportunity that there are, especially in our area, there are a lot of doctors that want to be involved in research because they're academic minded, but they went into private practice because they want more control. And so we started to pivot into that direction, seeing that opportunity. And so now what we see is an opportunity to, in a lot of ways, disrupt the research infrastructure like all of us are trying to do, by breaking down the communication barriers, by breaking down the siloing of information so that we all understand that we're all valuable pieces of the research infrastructure. Doctors, CRCs, CRAs, clinical directors, nurses, PAs, we all have a role to play. We all want to communicate well. And so we're trying to do that through using novel vendors that have really, really interesting tools like social media marketing, for example, or we partner with other things like Complion to do UREG, things that can streamline this process so that we can plug it in. And eventually what we want is to be able to call ourselves a site optimization organization where we have doctors that are PIs that we work with in a network that want to do research and are getting paid for it. And also we're consulting agents where we go into hospitals or private clinical sites and help them solve problems or build their group.
Site optimization, that's a new one, SOO.
Yeah, you heard it here first, folks.
You trademarked that?
Yes.
Amir, we gotta write an article on that.
Yes, and I would like to add to that because I take that and as the operations person, we peg it into reality with the vendors and what does this look like. How do you, and question for the IRB people here in the room, how do you make a process efficient when you have 4 or 5 sub-investigators on a trial, you have a 1572, you need to get 5 or 6 financial disclosure forms, you need wet ink signatures, a protocol amendment comes out, you need everyone's protocol training. I mean, think of how this historically gets done. Are you going to have a coordinator on an Uber lugging around a reg binder? Or are you going to implement something novel?
You need Creo.
Well, we have an electronic regulatory system that's compliant with the FDA's regulations about having the audit trail. I mean, these are all the systems that if you want to implement them in a large academic institution, it takes a year to put the committee together, it takes a year to put the budget together, it takes another year to figure out who's going to actually do it, another year to go out to the departments and get buy-in, and all in all, you're looking at 5 to 6 years to actually go live. Whereas at macro, does this fix a problem? Yes, great, let's just do it. And we just go and we do it. So, maybe we're looking at the model of a clinical research site of the 2025 trials. I don't know. I mean, we're not going to pretend to be experts per se, but I will say.
A tech company.
Correct, that's exactly right. We're solving the riddle to something that has been very difficult to do at a larger scale. So we'll see.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Any questions, Chris? SOO, site optimization.
You heard it here first.
No question. Sounds great.
Virtual trials, you guys doing?
We are interested in doing them. We have not done it yet.
The real ones, not the fake ones.
The real ones. I mean, we could talk all day about it. There's telemedicine. There's how do you develop an electronic medical record tailor-suited specifically to clinical research that is using blockchain technology to really encrypt and prevent. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it all.
This is real.
Yes, the stuff that's in the pipeline that we're not there yet, but we're working on it. I mean, imagine the day that you walk into the clinic and instead of a binder or a clipboard, instead you have an iPad, and in the iPad, as the physician's doing all of the assessments, it's customizable, and the EMR is accessible to your CRAs, and it's already, it's already been put together so that the information for those specific users is de-identified, for example. I mean, you're really looking at how do you disrupt this and make this tech forward in the future. Well, we're figuring it out as we go. Stay tuned, but like I said, SOO, heard it here first.
So this is crazy how sites will eventually, some will evolve into tech companies over time.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something to keep an eye on. So blockchain, that's new. I haven't heard of this.
Oh yeah, he can talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Blockchain?
Yeah.
I'm very bullish on blockchain.
Yeah,
You
I'm
are
bullish
too?
on Bitcoin. I don't know about blockchain.
I don't know about Bitcoin. We can talk. I invested in Bitcoin in 2013.
There you go.
Okay.
You did well.
You
And
did well.
I sold it
Oh, no,
because I
yeah.
decided recently.
Okay, good.
But yeah, blockchain, for those of you guys who don't know, it's very hard to explain, but it's basically a decentralized network of nodes, they're called, computers that verify information. So there's no central clearinghouse, so there's no way to really fool the system or hack into the system. And that's why currency is being built around these systems. But it's probably going to be the backbone of everything we do in 10 to 15 years. And one of the areas that a lot of companies are working towards doing this is in EMRs because of the fact that it's so secure. And so we're talking to a company that has built an EMR on blockchain to try to together build something that can be used within clinical trials so that we can customize data forms, data intake, and per trial in an easy way, and it's totally encrypted with blockchain.
Yeah.
If you try to do it with normal encryption, it gets very expensive and it's confusing, but with blockchain, it's, once you have the blockchain set up, it's sort of plug and play.
Really? Okay, we almost had a blockchain guy come.
Oh, I'm glad he's not here because
That's all right, we have you.
I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough
That's good,
to...
that's good. Interesting, okay. Any other questions? I know you gotta run, so
Yeah, I have time. There's questions.
this is all interesting to me as far as sites evolving, that kind of.
And the thing is too, probably the hardest commodity to find and recruit for in terms of talent is going to be emotional intelligence. So what work are you proactively doing to place managers or leaders in your sites that have strong emotional intelligence? So that if you have a coordinator come in who's upset because they couldn't get the PI to do something, can you see beyond the, oh, she's just upset, and actually get to the root of how do you empower your study coordinator to see the fact that their potential is huge, they just can't see beyond maybe the ego or whatever it is. The only reason why I speak to it is because as a study coordinator that was traumatized under the hands of authoritarian management in large institutions, I vowed to never do the same to my study coordinators. And it's worked out kind of all right, because I found in Dr. Cabin the same mentality. And together we do a two-pronged approach. We do it for our study coordinators, we also do it for our investigators. And somewhere along the middle we meet and we make some magic happen.
And just to tag on to that, I'll be the first one to admit, despite all the tech talk, the most important thing that we have and that I think any group has is the people. And if you spend a lot of time up front vetting and finding the right person for the job, you will save a lot of time and money in the long run in having headaches and turnover and all the other things that come with having the wrong people working for you. So Daniel and Annalise and Gohar and other people we have working with us, they're our most important assets, regardless of all of the technology that we talk to.
And I think it segues nicely into our next panelists, Monica and Kalade, because they're going to talk about site training. So I think that rather than trying to find the impossible, which is an experienced coordinator, especially if you're a newer site, you can't afford
No.
super good one. So you have to hire for potential, and that means you have to train properly. So before they get on, what do you guys do as far as training for, or do you bring on research training coordinators? Or
Yeah,
what do you bring on?
no, we do. We've got, interns who we like to train, and we're very transparent. We say, hey, listen, right now, where you're at with skill set, where you are with experience, I cannot afford to pay you a salary, but what I can do is I can be generous with my time. I can be generous with what I know, and if you want to come along, we also have observerships, which is people that they probably got a degree in psychology or a bachelor's of arts in whatever, but it could be people that just don't know about clinical trials, and who knows, maybe they have some unlocked potential that would make them amazing at what we do, and for lack of just opportunities that say, hey, you can walk in the door and just come for a ride along, they just don't discover it. So we do a lot of that, and what I keep an eye out for is what are people good at, what motivates them, and how do you harness that and leverage it, and what does that translate into a clinical trial? I don't know if that really answered your question, but the thing what we do for training specifically is I put them in the driver's seat a lot, and I do this is the scenario, let's go, and we kind of, with cushions all over, so to speak, metaphorically, I let them fall off the bicycle several times in the comfort and the safety of knowing that we're here to support your growth, and no matter what that's going to look like. It takes a lot of leadership, and I'm not meaning management or training, it takes a lot of leadership to have the security of knowing, hey, this person's coming to us with 2 master's degrees, no clinical trial experience, their potential is huge, and they can very well flick me off of my seat as a site director. I want her to, because that would bring value to us and maybe we can expand. And so, you know, just to go off a little bit on a tangent, someone like that will have a hard time getting hired at an institution because they are immediately overqualified for entry level.
They're a threat.
And if they come on, they're a threat to the management. The ego comes first. You can't care about any of that. You have to really focus on who are you as a company, what's the value that you bring, what culture do you want to develop, and then how are you showing up with those values in your company. Again, all of that starts, you know, to hire the perfect candidate, 80% of the work starts with you. And then the other 20, you know, or whatever percent is, how does that translate into your ability to develop that candidate's talent?
And just to clarify, when I said the right people, I meant the right soft skills, the right mindset, not necessarily. The right skills are important for certain positions, but for what Daniel's saying, for example, taking someone who learning this stuff, anyone with the right mindset can learn it. It's just the harder thing is finding a person with the right emotional intelligence and the right, incentive.
Do you guys stay away from the big health systems? Like, do you get Kaiser doctors that help? Or are you looking for?
We're fortunate and unfortunate to be in an area with a lot of private practice doctors.
Tons.
So that's kind of why it works where we are.
Now, do they come to you, or do you guys do it in their office? The studies?
It depends. We customize it. So
Okay.
one trial we're doing now, we literally are. It's customizable. So we do part of it in his office. We contract with a radiology suite that does the MRI, and we contract with a pharmacy. And we're sort of doing it in a modular way. Now that's a more complicated biologic study. If we're doing, for example, a simple ophthalmology study, we'll run it out of someone's office, the whole thing. So it depends on what they need. We have our own clinical space, which we can bring doctors to, but one of the barriers, I think the two biggest barriers in this industry are good PIs and recruitment. And a lot of times the PIs that are good, the PIs that are really good don't have the ability to recruit a lot of patients because they don't have that big clinical practice keeping them busy that would prevent them from being as involved. And then on the flip side, you have the PIs that have the big practice to recruit. You have the PIs that want to be involved because they're eager and they're young and they want to learn, but they don't have that big practice to recruit from. So, again, for the PIs, we want to incentivize them to say, look, if you really want to be involved in research, we'll work with you. If you can't leave your office, we'll try to run the study out of your practice. And that's where all of the technological sort of streamlining comes in.
Yeah, I think they have to understand, the physicians, that it's a long-term game. The ones, you can kind of weed out the ones that are just looking for something quick, which is not going to happen. If anything, the opposite is true in research. It's slow, very slow, but then it gets very good later on. I think that's one of the things that probably could help you have better chances of retaining physicians long-term, is looking for that long-term thinking. Which is hard to find. It's hard to find.
Yeah.
It's really hard to find. When doctors are thinking linearly, hypothetically, I tell my doctor, hey, come to a site, we have a SSV, site selection visit. He says, oh, how long is that? Well, it's an hour. Well, I could deliver 2 babies in that hour, and I get $5,000 each time. And I'm like, okay, hey, you need to do that. But he's short-term thinking. If you're long-term thinking, you're maybe going to deliver 1 baby and come in the site. I don't know, but you got to find the right balance of that physician who is looking to build with you and not necessarily to monetize every second of their life.
Totally. And to your point, I think one of the other things you can do is instead of having that, I think there's a lot of tension between the regulatory CRC side and the doctor, because there's a lot of differences in sort of the cultures in which you've come up in, and if you can sort of break that down and say, look, let's work together to make this as easy for you as possible. So what Daniel will do is, for an SSV, for example, he'll work really hard with the company and the physician to find a time that works, as opposed to just settling for whatever they send and making it so that if the PI wants to be involved, they have to be at that time. And so there are ways to make this better. You just have to do a little of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, good point. Question? Anything else you want to add? More talking points?
No, the only other thing that I wanted to say is when you go into the training, the CRC role, you know, a lot of models are different. Oh, we have a clinical research assistant, and we have a regulatory coordinator, and we have a study coordinator, and we have a budget coordinator. That's one way to do it, but you create a lot of silos. Where my mentality when I train a coordinator is, let me train you on everything that I know, because I'm doubling the bandwidth of what we can do as a company. So if a budget comes our way, the coordinator can't then say, well, we're waiting on budgets and contracts. No, you're good at budgets and contracts. Do the budgets and contracts. And when I come in, I will support you in whatever you went with, because I trained you to do that. So that's the only other talking point that I wanted to say is, you know, train your coordinator to have every skill and tool under the belt. Because the alternative is you have talent that you're underutilizing.
Yeah, and they're gonna leave.
And they're gonna leave anyway, you know, so that's the only other thing I wanted to add.
Retention. Coordinator, retain your employees, retain your position.
It's more than pizza parties and ice cream,
Yeah, or tacos.
or tacos for that. So, that's all.
Thank you guys,
Yeah.
appreciate it.